You are listening to Resilient Life, the podcast where we explore the power of resiliency. I'm Nikita Ross. It is my hope that listening to this podcast will give you the tools to connect with and increase your resiliency. So join me on this adventure of self-discovery and self-love. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Resilient Life, the podcast where we explore the power of resiliency. I am so excited about this week's guest. Carolina, will you please introduce yourself by telling us your full name and your chosen profession?
Hello, my name is Carolina and I am in social work. I've been doing social work for almost 20 years now. I've been in different places. I started my education in Northern California, and I've been to different schools. I've finished my master's in Long Beach, and so I've worked up and down California for most of my career. I've also worked in Arizona, and life also took me to Texas for a while, and so I worked there. I've worked with multiple populations doing different things. Most of my experiences in mental health, this severely, or I don't want to use that term actually. I don't.
What term do you want to use?
I don't know. I've never really liked that term.
And the term you're saying you don't like is the SMI population, which stands for severely mentally ill.
Yeah.
You don't like that terminology.
Yeah, I don't like that term. But essentially, that is the population that I have most of my experience working with, doing different things like case management, crisis intervention, therapy, multiple different things as social work. You know, it's a broad field, I suppose.
Yeah, it can be a broad field. And you can work with so many different populations. Mm-hmm. May I ask, one, kudos to you, because it does take special people to have like this open mind and patience to work with people who process differently than quote unquote mainstream population. Mm-hmm. And so kudos to you for having the patience and the open mind and the big heart to work with that population consistently for years now, as you stated. Do you know, and it may have just happened, but is there something that led you to work with this particular population over others? So you could have worked with elderly, you could have worked with children. There are like segments, as you said, that the field of social work is so broad. And you can work with so many different populations and employ social work in different ways. Is there something in particular that led you to work with this particular population?
I'm not sure how I got into it at first, because at the beginning it was just social work in general, and over time I think with mental health in particular, it just seemed a little bit of what you said about having the patience, and it really is. I am very passionate about it, and I take a lot of pride in the work that I have done and that I do. But it does take a special skill set because not everyone can do it. And so part of it, once I got into the field, trying different things when I first started my career, I realized that I did the work well, that I was able to step in with the client and help them, guide them, or even just listening and being there. And so a huge sense of responsibility just overcame me, like with time, with more and more time, seeing how many people come into the field and they just jump out because it's very heavy. It's very, very heavy. It's super taxing on so many different levels.
Yes.
So I realized that it really is a gift. And so I've accepted it.
Carolina, you touched on so many things I want to pivot down all of these paths. You talked about purpose, which is what I hear when you're talking about those things where it's like it's not a choice, it's kind of in you. And when you do it, it fulfills you.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about resiliency, how in the social work field, there can be a really high turnover rate because the work can be taxing. And so it takes this level of being intentionally resilient, if it is your chosen path, to be able to stay within it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you talked about one of the things that's near and dear to my heart, labels, and how you don't enjoy the label of SMI. I very much believe that language has power and
Mm-hmm.
words have power and meaning, and we should always attempt to use people first language. An example is I was in foster care. I don't use the word foster kid, even though there are people who don't mind that at all. I use the term person who experienced foster care or child who was in foster care. But I really think it's important for us to always honor the human first and then the condition or the situation next. And so I love that about you.
I love doing advocacy. I got a good idea of like the macro part of social work, and that's super exciting as well. And there are so many things that you could do with social work.
Something else you mentioned was how social work has a high turnover rate. And so that takes me to the topic of resiliency. And so I'm very curious to hear how you define resilience.
Resilience to me is the ability to carry on and not just like bounce back, but also to thrive in spite of disastrous environments or factors in your life. Like the ability to turn those things into something that instead of it being defeating, it's motivational, like the ability to just like continue going and thriving, not just surviving, but like thriving.
With that definition, would you consider yourself to be resilient?
Absolutely. Yes, I am an immigrant. My parents, I came to this country at 11 years old, and my parents are also immigrants. So there's a level of resilience there.
For sure.
I grew up in a very impoverished neighborhood, gang-ridden, drug-ridden, and so that in and of itself, a child experiencing that, it can be really tough.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, growing up in that environment and in the learning the cultures and yes, I do consider myself a resilient person. I don't feel like I am exactly all and everything that I wanted to do in life, but I'm getting there. I'm working on it. And I still feel this motivation and this very strong drive to want to continue doing what I do and more, So yes, I consider myself resilient. Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for that vulnerability. I don't think any of us have arrived to respond to yourself saying you're not quite there yet. I think our life is all about us just trying what you said you're doing. And I think that's a huge part of being resilient. So I love that. Thank you so much. Yeah. Tell me, Carolina, what brings you joy?
What brings me joy? I mean, so many different things, right? We have different parts of ourselves professionally and in relationships and in our environment and all kinds of different things, right? In areas of our lives. But I think one of the things that brings me joy is seeing or watching something come to fruition, something something that I've been working on, or something that someone that I'm watching grow, something like that, like something coming to fruition. It gives me a lot of joy. and starting new things as well. I would say like starting new projects and seeing things come to fruition would be two things that give me a lot of joy.
Thank you for sharing that. What is the healthiest thing you've done for yourself?
The healthiest thing that I've done for myself, I think I would say if I could summarize it to maybe 2 to 3 things, the healthiest, one of the healthiest things that I have done is shifting, like your mindset or your perspective on things, and not just in the way, in many ways. So, for example, shifting my thoughts, my self-talk, for example, from maybe listening to my negative self-talk or hearing those voices that we carry with us that might not belong to us, but they might belong to parents, teachers, family members, friends, right? Like those voices that are playing in the back of our head all the time. Shifting those to listening to something, the positivity around me, and with that, like challenging my own thoughts. Like, for example, something, and I think this is something that even you and I have talked about, compliments, for example, like being able to accept compliments, right? So that in and of itself, it can be so challenging because you have to turn off all of those negative voices, all of those negative thoughts that you have, and then open yourself to the possibility of like, hey, these thoughts might be wrong. And these other people, this positivity around me, there might be some truth in that. Why don't I just shift a little and open up, right? I think that shift in life has been the most productive to help me grow as a person. And most recently, one of the shifts that I've been practicing a lot is talking to my future self. And what,
Ooh.
yeah, it's very challenging sometimes because I want to do what I want to do, but I think of Carolina of the future, you know, not just the one right now, not the one tonight, not the one tomorrow morning, but in 30 days, what is Carolina going to be grateful that I started today? You know, my future.
Wow.
And then that turns into a month, or that turns into months and a year or 5 years or 10 years. So that thinking a lot about the Carolina of the future, like what would she appreciate me doing right now? Because I will be Carolina in the future. And the last thing, just staying able to learn, like staying curious, open to learning new things, which I think is what drives resilience, right? Like learning and trying new things. So
yes, I think that was really relatable, very open. So thank you for sharing that. I had never thought about it in the way that you put it, of what can I do now that's going to benefit future Carolina? I really like that perspective. And as you just said, like being curious, and when we're curious, we learn from other people, and just being open to learning those new things. And I love that you said changing that perspective to be open and receptive for feedback, to say, hey, maybe I could change this. Maybe I can work it on this. Maybe I can see this differently. I like that. Thank you for that insightfulness.
Yeah.
Tell me, how do you celebrate yourself?
I think that's also changed through time. And there are different things that we celebrate about ourselves. I have a lot of little personal gains in the last couple of years that I've been working on some stuff on myself. And there are some very personal not necessarily like huge, or I don't know how to categorize them, but more personal, on a personal level. And so it could be something as simple as like getting out of bed in the morning without struggling. And then I do celebrate myself. I do a lot of talking to myself, but in a positive way. I'm cheering myself. I have conversations with me in the mirror. I talk to myself as I would talk to a dear friend or someone that I love, or even sometimes a client. What would I say to myself? What if I were such and such person? And I celebrate myself that way, and just cheering myself on, and telling myself like, yay, you did good, like, you go, girl. And there are other things that I will share, other games that I will share with my loved ones, different things that we work on, and then we get a result and we're like, yay, and we want to share it with people, but there is a difference in how I celebrate certain things and how I celebrate others. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah, of course it does. Do you think it's important as humans that we celebrate ourselves, that we, even if it's not a full on, it doesn't have to be a party, but as you said, simple things of, good job, Carolina. You got out of bed today. Good job, Carolina. You exercise, you drink water, you meditated, you walk the dog, whatever it may be. Do you think it's important as humans and as a social worker by trade, do you think it's important that we take those like small wins?
I think it is those small wins that shape everything else. The celebrating those small wins and cheering myself on, it really sets the mood for the rest of my day, and in consequence everything else that I do. I feel it's very important that we recognize the good things that we do. We tend to focus a lot on the negative stuff around us and the mistakes that we make. I mean, how many times we have like a good day and then we make a mistake or something happens and we're like, oh my gosh, my day is ruined. And so it's important to celebrate yourself and your little accomplishments and big accomplishments, because in the end, it makes up the bigger picture. And it helps you challenge that negative self-talk that we have sometimes constantly going on, right?
Yes.
I am wanting to find out how much healthier I can get with shifting that negative self-talk to always having positive self-talk, and instead of having the negative self-talk all the time and just going to the positive sparingly, have it be the opposite, and what amazing things I can accomplish and how well I can feel and what all I can learn. I'm curious to see that, because I do feel that as humans or socially, I'm not sure how it happens, but we spend a lot of time in that negative place that is not productive. And so, yes, it is very, very important that you celebrate yourself. Yes, absolutely.
That is very encouraging, because I know that I personally struggle with negative self-talk more than I would like to. And I would imagine that people who are hearing this and who are seeing this on YouTube have moments of when they're struggling with negative self-talk as well. And so I appreciate the thought process that you're saying of, hey, let's try to like get those small wins, focus on those small wins. And then if we're having a good day and one negative thing happens, not letting that ruin our entire day.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is so pivotal. So it's like a very pivotal shift to help us change and have a more, for lack of a better word, positive life. So I agree. What advice would you have, Carolina, for a person who wants to increase their resiliency and they either are having difficulty identifying how they are resilient, or like connecting to their resiliency, or how do I increase my resiliency? What advice would you have for that person?
I truly think that is shifting your mindset, shifting, having that shift to start. I don't know what to call it. I don't know if it's strength or wits or what, but like to start challenging those things that don't serve you anymore, including if it's like deep core values that you may hold that may no longer serve you anymore. Being open to changing your perspective and challenging those thoughts. Being open to trying new things. Speaking of tools, right? Trying new tools and have the courage to continue practicing them. I think that's been what's served me the most. The shifting in the mindset. I would say that would be my advice, to start questioning your beliefs, your what is real, what serves you, what doesn't serve you, that part. I think once you start realizing that there's a world outside of your head and your thoughts, there's a whole world out there, and you open yourself to it, then you might find out things about you, about your environment, about your journey, about everything that maybe you had never contemplated before. And that's where that change happens, and resilience just flourishes in it.
I like that. So it sounds like you're saying being open to just seeing things differently, thinking about things differently, processing things differently. And it sounds like you're also saying just being open and not just being so fixed in our comfort zone of what's familiar, but being open to, one, acknowledging that we don't always know as much as we think we do, and just being open to learn new things and gain a new perspective from others and in general, and just being open to new experiences. Am I understanding that correctly? Is that where you were getting at?
Yeah, because once you're open to new experiences, then you're open to exploring your own thoughts and your own everything, challenging those and starting to identify things that you might want to change, or things that you might want to work on, or things that you want to learn, things that you want to try, and that is where resilience flourishes, in my opinion. It sounds very easy. In theory, it should work, but the ego gets in the way.
Yes.
And the universe has a way to humble you all the time, but you have to be on the lookout for it, because sometimes we can think, oh, this bad thing happened to me or something, but it really is just the universe saying, hey, think about that again, or how would you want to rephrase that kind of?
Yes.
You're having a conversation with the universe, right? Rethink that before you say it again. Other than that, I suppose that would be the my advice. Just work on your ego, and always ask yourself, instead of like that what would Jesus do? Have something to do with, like, is this my ego talking? What is my ego saying? Or what would the Carolina without the ego, what would she do? Or what would she say? Like trying to identify every time that it's your ego versus the other stuff that you want to get to,
I think that's sound advice. I think for me, it started with, and I still struggle with my ego trust. It's still there, but I'm working on it. I think for me, though, it started with one, learning, and we keep using that term. Oh, it's your ego. But learning, it took a while for me to understand how my ego was separate from me. And I know that sounds weird and spiritual, and I don't mean it in any way. But to first understand, I think the first step is understanding ego and how ego creeps in, and just to oversimplify ego and trust, it creeps in so many ways, but just to oversimplify, I am good. I did such a good job. And guess what I did? The oversimplified. That's what we think of when we think of ego.
Yeah.
But ego also peaks in this, I was done wrong. Carolina, you did me wrong. I'm the victim. There's so many ways. And so I think the first step would be identifying and learning what ego is. So, and then once we learn, it's like, oh, I have that. Because we can't work on our ego if we don't even fully understand what it is, right, how it works. And so I think that would be first. And then once it's like, oh, and then connect and say, oh, and then back to that openness that you discussed. Oh, I have that. Okay, I got it. I have one of those. And then baby steps, right? And that self-love, celebrating those little wins of, okay, today my ego won, but tomorrow we back at it. Or like, okay, I took a tiny bit of a win and I didn't tell that person I was right, even though I knew I was right. Is that for myself? Yes. I struggle with that. That is but it's whatever for you. However, like you said, Carolina, each person's ego is going to manifest differently. Mine manifests, and I know I'm right. I know what I'm talking about. I know I'm smart. I know these things. And so my work was, it doesn't matter if you're right. It does not matter. And so figuring that out. So I think those are the steps. One, understanding ego, then recognizing that you have it, and then like just baby steps to trying to diminish it. Or I don't know if you can completely ever kill it, and I don't know if you should, but just like not letting it be front and center. I think that's a big one. I think those are the steps. And I think everything you said is correct.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there is a healthy part of your ego, right? It helps you stay motivated. It helps with your drive, for sure. And recognizing like, hey, I see you, you're there. Yeah, wonderful, but then moving past it, like not staying in there like, oh yes, I am this great person.
Yes. Yes.
I know everything.
Exactly.
If you think of the ego as like the inner child, if you think of it in that sense, as to not have it be so aggressive. And so the way I work with it, it's like I will have a talk with little Carolina, like the 3-year-old or the 5-year-old me, and I say, okay, I can see that right now you would like to be held, or you would like, you need something. Let me tend to it, and then we can move on. But it is that piece of it, like recognizing in the moment. And that is very challenging, because sometimes we get upset or things happen and we react and we don't necessarily connect that it has something to do with something that's going on very deeply in from the past, and recognizing that we talked about it at the beginning, being kind and being helpful to ourselves, being forgiving to ourselves. And that's really hard at times, because we like to beat ourselves up, right?
Yes. So agreed.
In a less aggressive way, yes, it is like checking your ego, but recognizing there's a part of you that is lacking something, and tending to that.
It's more of, hey, there's a need there. What is that? And tuning in. It makes me think of a universal ego trip that a lot of us, not all of us, a lot of us struggle with is traffic.
I think it's a great example, because it's something that we all experience. And in sometime in our life, we've all been in a rush, and as a habit or just because we're running late or whatever. And yes, absolutely. Just taking a deep breath and talking to yourself in a positive way, in a caring and loving way, can help not just soothe you, but to think more clearly once you're
yes.
soothed,
Yes.
Yeah.
And it has the added benefit of, when we're kind and soothing to ourselves, we can then be kind to our fellow humans who are usually doing the best they can. Everything you said, Caroline, is so important to like just take that time and reflect and just say, I'm good here. I'm safe. and just calming yourself down and complimenting yourself, whatever it is, listening to some music, listening to a podcast, Resilient Life, listening to whatever you need to help you get calm. I think that's really good. I need this when I'm in the car, when I'm about to get angry. So I definitely will use these tools. So thank you for sharing that, Carolina.
Yes.
That is all of my questions. I want to thank you so much for being a guest on Resilient Life and sharing very potent advice, very practical advice as well for anyone listening. They now can grab tools to say, this is how I can increase my resiliency. This is helpful. I can breathe. You gave very practical tools. And so I just want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been great. And I love sharing. I'm not sure that I always have like answers. It's kind of wonderful this that you do even with these simple questions that are very loaded, but you do this stuff really, really well. Putting things in perspective and reflect, and so I thank you.
I hope this episode gave you some tools to connect with and increase your resiliency. I'm proud of you. Let's keep up the momentum. Follow Resilient Life on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube at Resilient Life Podcast. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.